Welcome back. For the next little bit, I'd like us to be thinking together about Ezra and Nehemiah. Remember, as you read Ezra and Nehemiah against the backdrop of Torah and the former prophets, what struck you? The people of God seem to have lost everything as a result of widespread nominality at best and thoroughgoing paganism at worst. I mean, they lost life and limb and intimacy with God. They lost the gift of the promised land, that symbol of God's presence in God's glory. And yet, faithful to his promise, God has preserved a remnant, and by his sovereign providence, he's brought them back to the land. It's true, the flag of David's kingdom isn't flying over Jerusalem. It's a Persian flag. Well, I think a key verse, well, a couple of passages I'd like to suggest, but a key verse in Ezra is Ezra chapter 7, verse 10, where Ezra set his heart to study the law of the Lord and to do it, and then to teach his statutes and his rules in Israel. Powerful statement. We'll come back to that. But the other would be in Nehemiah chapter 6, verse 3 and then verse 15, where it's reported he sent messengers to them saying, I'm doing a great work and I can't come down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and come down to you? And then half a dozen verses later, so the wall was finished in the 25th day of the month of Elul in 52 days. When all our enemies heard of it, and all the nations around us were afraid and fell greatly in their own esteem, for they perceived that this work was accomplished with the help of our God. And we'll come back to that. So what's the genre of Ezra and Nehemiah? Well, it's historical narrative still. This time based on memoirs of Ezra 7 through 10, and the memoirs of Nehemiah. This book, Ezra and Nehemiah, provides really a reprise of God's covenant work of salvation. We're introduced to Ezra, a Zadokite priest and scribe, and then Nehemiah, a trusted member of the Persian emperor's security staff, really, cupbearer to the king. And these two individuals are instrumental in teaching and leading the faith community to live in covenant revival. However, there is a downside. And that's the realization that so very soon after the exile and their return to the land, corruption and injustice and immorality is endemic. There's a powerful longer prayer by Ezra in chapter 9, and what I think of is maybe the shortest prayer in the Bible in Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 4. The theme of the book, well, think back, or I guess for us we have to think ahead. Chronologically, it's thinking back. In terms of the course, thinking ahead to Jeremiah. In Jeremiah chapter 25 and 29, God promised through the prophet that the exile would be limited to 70 years, and then he'd bring them home to his land. And this Zion theology, centered on the temple, reminded the faithful of God's presence, and it gave witness to the watching world of God's grace. So, the return to the land was really an affirmation of his promise that he would send the anointed Redeemer with roots in Judah, this Redeemer yet to come. And this narrative advances the progress of redemption toward that time in the providence of God that the Apostle Paul referred to as the fullness of time, when God sent forth his Son. So, more than 140 years after the fall of the Davidic kingdom in Judah and the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, listen to Nehemiah praying in chapter 1. He's really praying back Torah to God. He prays, "O Lord God of heaven, the great and awesome God who preserves the covenant and chesed for those who love him and keep his commandments, let your ear now be attentive, your eyes be open. Hear the prayer of your servant, which I am praying before you now, day and night, on behalf of the sons of Israel, your servants, confessing the sins of the sons of Israel, which we have sinned against you. I and my father's house have sinned. We've acted very corruptly against you, have not kept the commandments, nor the statutes, nor the ordinances which you commanded your servant Moses. Remember the word which you did command your servant Moses, saying, if you are unfaithful, I'll scatter you among the peoples. But if you return to me and keep my commandments and do them, though those of you who have been scattered were the most remote part of the heavens, I will gather them from there, and I will bring them to the place where I have chosen to cause my name to dwell. They're your servants, your people, who you redeemed by your great power and by your strong hand. Oh Lord, I beseech you, may your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant and the prayer of your servants, who delight to revere your name, and make your servant successful today, and grant him compassion before the king." Well, I put it to you that Nehemiah understands that the promise covenant has been breached, and that violation is being costly. And watch what happens. I mean, Nehemiah is not standing aloof from these rebels and wagging his finger at them and said, they have sinned. Watch how this transformational leader accepts responsibility, and as leader he identifies with the people that he's leading. But watch this. He also understands that the promised covenant is an everlasting covenant. I mean, regarding God's reconciliation and restoration project, it's not yet mission accomplished. Think about it. We'll see you in a bit.